What is going on, everyone? It is TripleCrown24 back today with a new sports card psychology podcast. Great to have you with me this Thursday, every Thursday, or whatever day you may be listening to this holiday weekend here, Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully, some time for some rest and relaxation, maybe some time for some baseball as well. And today's show is going to be another player focus. I really love doing these. Most of you know my background is in player collecting, so I really enjoy getting into the minds of fellow player collectors and really getting to hear about their favorite player. Just they have such a wealth of knowledge with them. And my guest today is no exception to this. And we're talking about a player who I giggle about this because I've never really understood it. Is probably one of the more controversial figures of the past few decades. He is a Yankee. That kind of comes with the territory of doing that, but he may be one of the most humble guys I have ever experienced play the game, at least in my time, and a guy who I've always really liked. I never really could think of anything bad to say about him, but for some reason he carries this stigma about him, and he's a very polarizing figure, very well loved, and in some cases a lot of resentment towards him. And we're going to dive into all that today, but I want to introduce my guest before we get into any of that. You probably know who she is because she is everywhere. She is currently with Golden Auctions, formerly with Tops. You can find her on Twitter. You can find her on Hobby Hotline. It is the one and only Sooz. And Sooz, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Hey there. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. As a Tigers fan, they don't want to hear my bias about. I would just talk about how Jeter was going to go to U of M for 45 minutes, but nobody wants to hear that. So you are a Jeter player collector. I think you've got probably a few thousand Jeter cards, from my understanding, and you're a big Yankees fan as well. So that begs the question: when you have a team that is as history, or their history is as rich as the Yankees, what are the traits about Jeter that drew you to him to collect, as opposed to any of his contemporaries to wear the pinstripes?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, I'm from New York. I grew up in New York. I grew up 15 minutes from Yankee Stadium. So I'm a Yankees fan, through and through. Um, for Jeter, I was a big Don Mattingly fan too, like of that generation. But for Jeter, like, here was this like young guy who was not, honestly, he was not too far removed from my age. He's not that much older than me, but here he was, like, just sort of like the king of New York, like his rookie year, he just took it by storm, and it was so crazy in 1996. And I love Andy Pettit, and I love Mariano Rivera. But Jeter, from like the way he played and from how he came up, and the fact that, like, you mentioned that he was like kind of humble. Like, it wasn't just like he's like, yeah, I'm here. I'm good. I'm taking over. Like, he was respectful and nice and kind, and just like, he sort of just embodied what it meant to be a Yankee in a way. And and it was exciting. I mean, 1996, he wins Rookie of the Year. They win the World Series, Rookie of the Year unanimously. And like, as a 16-year-old in high school, like, how can you not fall in love with that?
I can definitely relate to that. I think it's incredibly special, and in some cases, I really don't envy those, and I almost feel bad for those who didn't get to grow up like that. Like, you got to grow up with what was, I would say, the last great baseball dynasty that we've had. We haven't seen a team. I mean, I don't think since the year 2000 there's been any team to repeat, and the only team that even came close to it was they were defeated, I would argue, very handedly by your Yankees back in 2009, that being the Phillies. And to have a guy like that who comes in and he's known as the captain and all that, that's got to be incredibly special. I mean, for me, it was Miguel Cabrera, and what that team meant. Being able to grow up with that was so incredibly special, and you do hold on to that. But uh, he was definitely a figure. Would you say that he was maybe a modern day equivalent of some of the other Yankee figureheads, like a Roof from several generations, or DiMaggio, Mantle? Keep going down the line. There seems to be one every 10 years or so. But was he kind of that guy for you and your generation?
100%. And, to be honest, it's not even my generation. And this is how you can tell, like, he sort of transcended. Again, in 1996 to, I mean, he came up in 95, 1996 to 2014, I believe was his last year. And I went to a game years later after that, because I still go to Yankee games, with my young nieces, who, again, they were young, 7, 8, 9 years old. And they're like, "Where's Derek Jeter?" I'm like, He's retired. He doesn't play anymore, And the fact that these, like, young kids want to know where Derek Jeter is and they want to watch him play, I think speaks volumes to, exactly what he meant for fans and Yankees fans and New Yorkers, because, you know, they're not going there asking for, like, Chuck Knobloch. They're asking for Derek Jeter. So it's kind of cool to see that, because, like I said, like, he's not just my generation, but, like, he transcended generations, and you still have fans, to this day, who growing up and, like, oh, Yankees fans, like, yeah, Derek Jeter, like, he was special.
He's one of those rare sports figures that they transcend sport into pop culture. For example, my girlfriend might know a handful of baseball players. She knows who Derek Jeter is. And I think when you even have that casual presence where someone who doesn't even follow sports knows your name, that's a real telltale sign that you're doing something special. And I'm glad that you brought up that he seems to have gone beyond just one generation. He expands among many. Do you think that Jeter is among I would say the top 5 most collected Yankees? Where would you rank him on that list if he
Wow.
were to be in the top 5?
I mean, for Yankees, it's tough. There's been so many amazing Yankees players, and you were listing them off. So you have Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle. I mean, Mickey Mantle's probably the most collected. Um, Joe DiMaggio. Um, Trying to think where he would fit in. I mean, maybe as far as, like, people who were, longtime Yankees fits in, he probably then makes the top 5. I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting it. Yogi Berra. So he's, if not top 5, he's close to it. But when it comes to Yankees, there's just been so many amazing Yankees players over the years. I think it's tough, but due to the sheer vast amount of cards he has, he might just end up cracking the top 10, because, like, it's easier but also more difficult to get his cards. It's easier because there's so many, but difficult because some of them are so hard to get and so expensive.
That seems to be a pretty popular challenge I see with the more casual Jeter collectors, is that it's very skewed towards that top. And I guess you could argue the same for, say, a Mantle. There are those, of course, your 52 tops, your 51 Bowman. Those are going to be up there in a different stratosphere that most collectors aren't going to touch. And that's the sad truth sometimes, as much as we can daydream about that. But Jeter is in that category and even above that too. I mean, with Golden, I'm sure you see some rare Jeter cards that come through the doors, and I've seen them come through other auction houses or even just through eBay. Some of the rare 90s inserts that are out there. And I feel like he's one of those guys that kind of is one of the figureheads at the top of the 90s insert list. So I think of Griffey as being one of the more obvious ones there too. But Jeter is one of those guys when you're looking through the checklist, like he's one of the guys that you're looking for. That's kind of different. Do you like that challenge of having those extremely rare, and in some cases they go 5, even you can flirt with 6 figures in some cases, or do you prefer maybe something where it's a bit more simple like Mantle, or aside from maybe 1 or 2 and some food and beverage issues, you're not really going to be too strapped to find an example of the card, at least within a reasonable price?
Yeah. I mean, for myself, because this is really my main collection, my main PC, like, I never really collected any other way, in the sense. There are the player. I have so many, like, cards of other players. So it's not to say I only have Jeter cards. I have thousands upon thousands of other players. But to specifically sit down and go after, um, like, other players, that list is really small. So this is the only way I've really ever collected a player, having all these, like, rare inserts and this plethora of mid-range cards. But having said that, like I've actually had to sort of limit my focus because there's just too many cards. He has like 20,000 different cards, and it's impossible to collect them all. So it's like even within Jeter collectors, it's not like Jeter collectors are like, okay, I'm going to collect all 20,000 cards. There's different segments. Like there are people like, I'm only going to collect, his 92 to 96 run because that was his rookie year, 96. I'm very much like that in the sense that I have so many others, but I'm only my main focus is when I look for cards is from that 92 to 96 run to see what I can finish. Um, During the pandemic, I got to finish 92. That was exciting. Not counting a card that's worth $25,000 that I'll never afford. So I don't even consider it. But I like the chase, and it's something that I know I'll never complete. And for some people that might be like, oh man, if you never complete it, why even start it? But for me, part of collecting is not just owning it, but then the journey as well. So the fun part is going through that journey and finding cards that you want to collect and own and add to your collection.
It would be so incredibly boring if we could just have everything snap of the fingers and have it all. That I think that's what makes the rare inserts so appealing. And I know that some of them, I've talked to a lot of Jeter collectors out there, and by a lot I mean a few dozen. It's not like they're lining up to talk to me. But a lot of them, I see them talking about when something like a Star Rubies comes up for auction or something along those lines, and all the speculation about what it's going to go for. I think I remember one that was almost $200,000. I forget which card it was. It was a couple of years back now. But for you personally, what are some of the more sought after Jeter inserts? If you could kind of build your Mount Rushmore, the ones that you would go after, and would you say that they are kind of in line with what other Jeter collectors kind of consider the grails, if you will?
My collecting is very different from others. I think one of the sort of grails I have is the one I can't afford from 92. And I always forget the name of it just because I just don't. I'm like, and it's coming to auction very soon with Heritage, which is why I'm actually gonna look this up on their Twitter right now because they just posted it the other day. But for chasing, I don't have like specifics here. What is this? 92 Little Sun. I don't know why that keeps flickering. 92 Little Sun autographed card, and it's the autograph that I cannot afford. I have the non-autographed versions. But for me, like that would be the one card on my list that I would say would be like my grail that I would want to collect, because I can't afford it, and it's literally the only 1992 card I do not own. So that one would be up there. As far as the others, I don't really have anything specific, to be honest. Like a lot of it's like, do I own this? No, great, let's get it. If I own it, I don't even look at a second one. I'm kind of just like one and done.
I mean, with 20,000 cards, it's difficult to kind of go back and then retrace your steps over some of those, and it only gets worse, I would say, for those who are collecting players even beyond Jeter. I say Jeter's era as if he played many eons ago. He only retired 8 years ago, but from that 90s 2000s era. And it kind of brings up a topic now that we're getting into this time where you have Beltre is retired and Ichiro is retired. You're going to see Pujols and Cabrera kind of hanging up, and it's going to be the bit of an end of an era where a lot of the stuff now people complain about it being more massively produced, and there's not very many truly rare cards. A lot of it is manufactured scarcity that is out there, according to some now. Whereas Jeter, we know the scarcity because a lot of the print runs on these super rare inserts are known, and then his rookie card happens to be arguably, I would say, one of the most condition sensitive rookie cards in the post-war era, especially considering it was released in 1993. Is Jeter really the last Hall of Famer in baseball that is going to have truly rare cards, or what do you think going forward is going to be the star rubies or the essential credentials for the next wave of guys that fill his shoes?
That's a good question. I think what you see now is that excuse me. that Bowman kind of just rules it. Like the super refractor, the red refractors. There's really not a lot of, to be honest, like Topps and Bowman have not done a really good job of creating an insert like that. Whereas like Panini, they've done a better job of creating like a Kaboom or something like recently, the downtown cards, like that kind of stuff that people really enjoyed. I don't know if those have lasting power as far as value is concerned, however, because they are new. I don't know what's going on with the lighting, because they are new. But I think it really is just like Bowman is sort of king, like people love their first Bowman cards, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon.
It's tough to argue with the Bowman argument. I think with Topps introducing the home field advantages in this year's series one, that maybe that opens the door a little bit for something like that, especially with the success. We've seen Topps and Panini kind of, I mean, the year after Topps stopped doing football, including Inception, Panini comes out with a product called Origins, and you can't tell me that's not just an Inception clip. It's all right. Mine does the same thing in here too, where it will just randomly do that. With the 93 SP, one of the things about it that's really interesting is that when you open up a pack, even today, one of the issues that you see with it is bricking. And outside of Jeter, I would say the only rookie card that's been released in the last 30 years or so where you would still see that issue out of the pack would be the Ichiro one. I see too many of those 2001 Topps where they are bricked coming out of the pack now. But in addition to that, just the foil and the very, the thin nature of those SP cards, even out of the pack, you're not guaranteed a 10. And we've seen that before. I mean, we've seen Ken Golden. He opened up, some 93 SPs and got them back, and they weren't even mint. I mean, they were close. There was a few of them that were right up there, but there's no 10s in there. Whereas today you open up a pack, and for that, the quality control may be hit or miss in some places, but generally speaking, you can get a 10, and people are aware that these cards could be valuable one day. Do you think that Jeter's rookie card is going to be one of those last ones that is really tough to get going forward? Or do you think that there could be something that is released in the future that is along the lines of what we see with the 93 SP and Jeter?
I mean, it depends on what you want from like the Jeter SP. Do you want a 10? You're never going to get it. Like, like it literally just sold for $600,000 at Gold at a 10. Do you want an SP? They're affordable, like at a much lower grade if you want one. It really just depends on what you want. Like I have two of them. One's not in great condition. I'm sure if I got it graded, it would be a 5 or a 6. Didn't want to get it graded because at the time, like I just wanted to own it. I just wanted to have one. I also have an 8.5, which it's a lot nicer, and I'm happy with that. Do I think there'll be something like that in the future? No, because I mean, you look at 1993 when his cards were considered rookie cards. There's maybe 7, 8, at most 9. I don't remember off the top of my head. There's not that many. Now you have guys who come up to be rookies, and you have 50 cards in 1 year. Like that come out. I can think of like when it comes to like base rookie cards, Trout in 2011, like his update card is up there, and then what? There's not a lot there in it, especially now with like how much product is made, and not just like, oh, there's 50 products in a calendar year, and the presses are running on these products. Like Wander Franco's, Series 1 rookie card from this year, the RC, the one that has RC. I'm not going to get into the Bowman's Best debate, but like his card from this year, like thousands upon thousands of them. And I think all the ones, I always looked this up last week at some point, and all the ones that have already been sent to PSA, they have like more than 50% came back as a 10. It's like, so it has gotten better, with the printing and all that's kind of stuff. I don't think you're ever going to see something like the Jeter SP or the Trout update. And if you do, it's going to be something that's going to be incredibly rare.
It might be something that Fanatics could potentially do when they kind of get more of their influence in there. But yeah, I agree with you, especially with just I think people are more aware now that what these cards could potentially do, especially something like a Jeter SP. If people would have known that in 2022, you could get $600,000. You could buy a house for the cost of a 10 Jeter SP. Then things might have been handled a bit differently back then. I want to talk more about Jeter overall now because, like I said, this episode was inspired in part because for two reasons. One of them, I had a video randomly pop up on my YouTube feed the other day. Just you never know what kind of rabbit holes you'll go down with YouTube, but it was I think the title was something along the lines of "Is Derek Jeter the most overrated player of all time?" And I saw on Twitter that you had gotten in a discussion with a few people about is Derek Jeter overrated? And it's a question that I hear quite a bit. And really, I've never understood why he gets, I guess, the hate. Is it jealousy? Is it hate? Is it resentment? I don't know what the proper word is to describe it. But what do you think the general opinion of Derek Jeter is in the hobby today?
I think he's mostly well liked. I think that there's so many fans from other teams too who just are just like, look, I like the guy. Even if I hate the Yankees, I liked Derek Jeter. I think people ask that question because it does probably rile Yankee fans up to be like, hey, is the guy who has the sixth most hits in Major League Baseball history, is he overrated? So I think, it's a question to ask because it sparks this kind of conversation. And I guess the thing that annoyed me, because when somebody asked it, like on Twitter, I was like, who cares? Like, honestly, who cares if he's overrated? It doesn't matter. He's in the Hall of Fame. Like, he has the sixth most hits in Major League Baseball history. He has 5 World Series titles. He's never won an MVP. So what? Like, who cares? He did everything that, Yankee fans would have hoped he would have done in his career. And he was exciting and he was fun. And yeah, he was not great on defense. And like, I'll fully admit that. Like, and that's the argument people are trying to make with me. They're like, his defense and like pulling out like every stat in the world. I'm like, okay, what's your point? Like, that was me. I was like, what's your point? He was not good at defense. You're right. His range was terrible. Okay. It's like, so that doesn't change anything that happened. It doesn't change how many World Series titles he helped the Yankees win. It doesn't change that he's in the Hall of Fame. It doesn't change like his legacy that he left behind. So that's why it's like I don't understand fully. Like, I get it. Like I said, it sparks conversation and people are talking about it. We're talking about it. Social media people are going to talk about it because again, Yankees fans get a little crazy. I'll admit that too. So it riles them up. So that's why people ask it. And I think, I don't, it's like to say, like, is it jealousy? I don't know. People have made the argument because, like, the Houston Astros passed on Derek Jeter when they went to draft, right? They drafted Phil Nevin instead. And the question is, like, well, if they actually drafted Jeter and he chose to play with them, because the reason is, like, they was saying, like, Jeter would have played with the Astros. Does he get the same type of accolades and recognition if he played with the Astros and not the Yankees? Probably not. Like, yeah, it's New York. It's the Yankees. It's the most iconic and recognizable team in the world. So, no, he wouldn't get the same treatment and the same recognition if he played for somebody else. But he didn't. He played for the Yankees. And it's like you could play. And I've never enjoyed playing a what if game, so I'm not going to play it now either. Like, the reality is, he is a Hall of Famer who had an exceptional career with the Yankees, who had pretty poor range, and that's okay.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I largely there's nothing that you said that I don't disagree with. I'm a Tigers fan. I don't really. When Jeter went down, he had the ankle injury in the playoffs against the Tigers. It upset me because he's one of those guys that did he give us problems? Yes. Was I angry at him at times? Yes. As a player, not as a human being, he was fine. But I mean, he hurt us many times. But as a competitor, I want to beat that guy. I want to know that my team went on the field and we're playing against this guy who is a no doubter, Hall of Famer, first ballot, should have been 100%. And we're going to go in there to his house and beat his team on the biggest stage. That is what, gets me excited as a fan, and it makes you feel like you've earned it. But with him too, I've never understood that argument that with 3,000 hits, that's a milestone that I don't know when we'll see that again. And perhaps as time goes on, we'll get a greater appreciation for that. People can say, you make the compiler argument or whatever. You're not a compiler if you reach 3,000 hits. That's just, you don't compile your way to that unless you're playing 30 seasons. You have a Jamie Moyer type of career, but I would argue that no one in that club really is at that level where they were playing. He played 20 seasons. And to get there and average 150 hits a season, especially today where players aren't playing every day or they get injured, it's just, we may never see it again. It's truly special. And you touched on the point of the Astros. I've always loved the story with the Astros where Hal Newhouser steps down. And I mean, he turned down a scholarship at the University of Michigan to go pro. And he comes over to the Yankees. And it's not the easiest city to play in. We all know that. And not every player is meant for New York, but his style, it just seems to mesh so well with New York. Do you think that the environment of being in New York drove him to be successful, not necessarily because he was playing on good teams, but just because it suited him? Like, would he be, I know you said you don't want to play the what if game, but I guess we're just more so expand on the connection to the city itself
Yeah,
instead.
I mean, I think he's so charismatic. Like honestly, like he's very well polished. He's charismatic. He always said the right things, and I think whatever team he would have gone to, he would have been a star on that team. Would he have been like this icon? I don't know if on any other team, but I think he would have been a legit star in any team he went to, just because he always said the right thing. He spoke in sound bites. Like honestly, like he gave exactly what he said, exactly what was always needed to be said. And and he came through and he was a leader. I think he would have been that on any team. I think with New York it gets amplified more because instead of having like one or two beat writers, you have 10 people coming to every game with different national media and TV and all these different types of things that allowed him to sort of be amplified across of all of baseball and not just your regional area kind of thing. So I think going to New York helped him become this ultra star instead of just like a baseball star, like it's like you mentioned Miguel Cabrera, like he's a star on the Tigers, right? Yeah, like obviously, like he's a star on the Tigers, but he doesn't have that national sort of. Everybody knows who he is in baseball, but it's like he's not starring in like Pepsi commercials or that kind of stuff, and I think going to New York allows somebody like a Jeter to do that.
In Detroit, the closest we get to that is Matthew Stafford doing a AT&T commercial that just
Weird
buries the
commercial.
Lions. Yeah, they play that on the MLB.TV commercial breaks. You just can't escape it. But that's for a different show. We'll talk about Matthew Stafford some other time, which will be never because it's still sore. But back on the subject of Jeter, yeah, I've always found his connection to New York very interesting, and also the expectations. I mean, the Yankees, I feel that being a Yankee fan, correct me if I'm wrong, the expectation every year is World Series or busts. There's never we're rebuilding this year. It feels like the Yankees are always, if they're not in playoff contention, something is going horribly wrong. At least I would say, since Jeter really entered the league. I mean, there were some rough years during the Mattingly era before that, but since that, would you say that's accurate as a Yankee fan?
I mean, from 1982 to 1994, I mean, four was a short season. You didn't have the Yankees make the playoffs. So I think, you got a whole generation of fans who were conditioned for their team not to make the playoffs. And then 1995, they lose to Seattle in dramatic fashion. And then 96 happens and they win 5 World Series. I mean, well, they win 96, 98, 99. They win 4 in 5 years, right? That's crazy. That's insane. Completely spoiled, Yankees fans for life at that point. Because you went, like you mentioned, it's this crazy dynasty. Like it's insane. That doesn't happen and hasn't happened and hasn't even come like even remotely close to happening. So you have this, generation of Yankee fans who are kind of hungry for that again. And so it's like, if you don't make the playoffs, like these guys did it, why aren't you doing it? So I think it's tough because like I think we are very, as Yankees fans, we are very critical of the teams. I'm definitely critical of them. I think I was pretty much cursing out every player on that team the first week of the season, and then suddenly they're like, "Oh, they just won 15 in a row. Cool!" Like they're not as bad as we thought they were. Um, but for me, I just want them to be competitive, like in the playoffs. And yes, they have to, like, they need to make the playoffs, because if they don't make the playoffs, to me, if they're not in the postseason, then what's the point? You know. And as long as they're competitive, I'm okay with that. I'm not thrilled with them losing, but I feel like as long as they're competitive, and if they lose to a better team, they lose to a better team. Like, I'm not gonna get mad about that. That happens. But I want them to be competitive.
Wish I could say the same. I live in Cincinnati, so there's one abysmal team that I've experienced nightly, and then I follow a team that is almost equally as abysmal right now. So you got it pretty good in New York overall, I would say. But yeah, that
Yeah.
expectation is there, and I think what feeds into that too, and we've seen this maybe more so with some of the more, I would say, the more recent Yankees to come through their system. This isn't even just in a baseball sense, but also in a hobby sense too, that it breeds this very lofty expectations that become unrealistic, where these guys are going to become the 21st century Babe Ruth. And newsflash, that's just not going to happen in today's game. It's a team sport, and you're not going to have a guy like Babe Ruth who has more home runs than entire teams do in a season anymore. That's just not the case. But these expectations are built up that I don't even know if necessarily we are, and I say we as, the people who are building up these people, are actively aware of, just what kind of expectations we're sitting. So there's two examples that come to mind. The first one right now is kind of who I would say is the face of the franchise for now in New York, and Aaron Judge. And everyone was so into Judge mania after 2017, but it hasn't really been the same since then. I know people are getting on him for not hitting as many home runs, or just being injured. To some extent, you see that with Stanton, but I think Judge kind of being the homegrown guy and having that 52 homer season, breaking McGuire's rookie record, we see that right now. How different is it for a guy like Judge coming up today, and how much, I guess sports wise, and more importantly, I don't know if that's necessarily more importantly, but for this conversation, hobby wise, is it compared to Jeter? Would you say it is? So, I mean, Jeter coming up in the 90s and Judge in the 2010s.
Yeah, it's the biggest differences is that excuse me, is that I think social media has played a huge role in this, right? There was Social media didn't really exist when Jeter was coming up. Jeter also, actually similar to Judge, they didn't really have they didn't have these huge expectations coming up, right? Jeter was coming up because Tony Fernandez broke his arm. So he wasn't expected to be the shortstop at the time, but he did because they needed somebody. Um, Judge coming up wasn't like this highly touted prospect either. Like, he was a first round pick, but people thought, oh, he's too big to play. He strikes out too much, and like all these different things. I was actually at his debut game when he came up in 2016, because it actually happened to be a 1996 reunion. So the 1996 team was there, and my husband bought us tickets so I could go see, the 96 team reuniting before the game. And that was Judge's debut game, was that day. And he hit a home run and kind of just sort of went on a tear, in 2017, obviously. Like, he didn't pass his rookie eligibility at that point, and then 2017 went off. I think if he wins a World Series, you see a complete change in what happens. I think, for Yankees especially, that's like a big deal. Like, yes, he hits a lot of home runs, but what else? It's like there is this expectation, we just talked about it, of there being more for Yankees. And I think that's true even for Yankee players. There has to be, another level. And his cards they're still pretty, like, I think they're like affordable in a way, but they look, his autographs still sell for hundreds of dollars. When he first came up, they were selling for like nothing. Like, I remember buying his rookie year autos for like $20, $25 at the time. And then, he starts hitting home runs like like, whatever. And then I couldn't afford his autographs anymore. So I have a bunch though because of that. But I do think that, for him, he needs to add a World Series title with the Yankees to his sort of resume to to see another sort of spark or spike in his card values.
I definitely think you're onto something there. And one thing too about Judge is when he first came up, I remember, I forget which talk show it was. It was like a Jimmy Fallon or something where he went into New York, and it was one of those things where Aaron Judge asked people what they think about Aaron Judge. And nobody knew who he was. They were talking right to the man, and they couldn't recognize that this was Aaron Judge. So he's not necessarily someone who has transcended pop culture in a way that Jeter was. I mean, Jeter, for numerous reasons, became a household name. Do you think that is possible with someone like Judge, or I guess anyone currently in the organization, to become? I won't. I think it would be unfair to say just like Jeter, but a modern equivalent of Derek Jeter in
I
terms
mean,
of their presence.
if Judge was gonna go date like Mariah Carey, I think he might have a better shot. Like, again, Jeter's 96. He's dating Mariah Carey. She's sitting in the ball games. Like, this all added to Jeter's sort of allure. No, there's nobody on this team who is up at that level of Derek Jeter. Judge is close. He's the closest, but he's not at that level of a Jeter. And again, I love Judge. I really do. And I'm gonna be sad when he's not gonna be a Yankee after this year. But yeah, he's the closest, but he's not close to Derek Jeter.
We've got a nice warm seat for him at a right field near Kaline's Corner in Comerica Park whenever he's ready to come to town. We've got number 99 reserved too. But no, all jokes aside, another guy in the system too that I think is very interesting is Dominguez, who is probably next to Judge is top two most talked about Yankees active players, probably, and prospects, I guess I have to say too, over the past 5, 6, 7 years now. And Dominguez is a guy who, hobby wise, he's got the same fanfare that Jeter does. In fact, there are Dominguez cards that are outselling Jeter cards, which is absolutely astonishing. And this topic gets a little bit more juicy today because he deleted a bunch of photos on Instagram and all that too. The amount of pressure that is put on this guy just with how much money people have put into his cards and how much prospecting. I mean, it would be the same thing as Aaron Judge. If I walked into a room right now with Jason Dominguez, I may know who he is. I wouldn't be confident enough to approach him by any means, being for sure, because I think I look like an idiot when it wasn't actually Jason Dominguez. But nobody would recognize who he is. I'm sure most people who have bought his cards probably have never seen a Tampa Yankees game or any of that. But the expectations there when these prices are going for Jeter prices, do you think that there's any way that Jason Dominguez can succeed and kind of combat the resentment? Because I've already seen hate for him where people say, oh, he only had a 741 OPS last year and he's not that great and all that, when really he's a teenager that he can't even go legally buy alcohol. And people are already making these conclusions about him. Is there any chance that a guy like that can succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the sort of microscope on him is unfair. Like you said, he's young. He's playing his first season of professional baseball. Like, I don't think he played last year. And I think it's a little unfair. Like, he is this young prospect, and like those expectations and those sort of things that other people are putting on him. He's very confident, but at the same time, like, other people are putting these lofty expectations on him. So I think it's a bit unfair, and I have no idea if he could ever reach that level. I have no clue. Like, he's still in low A. Like, I don't even know if he's gonna reach double A. Never mind, like, hit a Jeter stratosphere. I think he's interesting. Certainly somebody to watch and develop. He's not a Juan Soto at this point. Juan Soto was 19 years old and, like, playing for the Nats. So um, I think a lot of these prospects have unfair expectations, not just him. And and whether it's from card collectors or just baseball fans in general, I just think some of these expectations are just so unfair because it's like, card collectors like, oh, I want my values to go up, and it's like, okay, cool, but these are still just people who, are trying to do their job, and even though it's a sport and it's a game, they're still just trying to do their job, and they don't care about your card values.
Yeah, it really puts it in perspective too. I mean, these are real people, and people are getting upset because their pieces of cardboard have gone down in value over, these real people. I mean, this is his career and his livelihood too. He's probably dreamed of this since being a young child, and he doesn't want to fail either. And I mean, if your cards go up, that's great, but it's definitely not at the center point. With Jeter, I would say, from what I've read about Jeter, and I mean, you got to experience him firsthand, so I definitely take what you said, where he wasn't as highly regarded coming up, and that kind of helped open the door. In some sense, I think that helped a guy like Soto too, just because he didn't have a bunch of cards prior to his debut, and when he kind of came up, all the attention was on a guy like Acuna, who had come up at the time, or the other top prospects down there in the system at the time that kind of came up, and Otani mania going wild at the same time too. So, a guy like Soto, but that's a truly once in a generation type of thing that happens. The same thing with Jeter too, where he's truly once in a generation. But I think this is really interesting too, is that the Yankees have a very weird place in the hobby where you don't necessarily have to be the best player to be the most collected. And I would say right up there is someone like Mantle and Jeter. I would say they're not in many people's top 10 all-time players list, but they are up there among the most collected and most popular. But it seems that today there's a larger focus on more so what you do on the field rather than what you do off the field. Would you agree with that? And do you see that continuing moving forward, where it's not as much about the legend of these guys as opposed to more so matter of fact, what are they doing on the field now?
It doesn't even feel that way. It actually feels more like people are buying for what they hope they can do on the field, and not, because like again, you look at these players, right? Who are the top players in baseball right now? Manny Machado. Like honestly, like Manny Machado is probably top 5 player in baseball this season. Like but his cards don't have that value. Um, but you're going to sell these prospect cards for 6 figures, and that's ridiculous. Like honestly, I think that's ridiculous. Like as a collector, somebody who's been in this hobby a long time, you're buying on what you hope that they could achieve one day. And that to me is just like, good for you for having that money to do that. But to me, that's just, it's like, it's crazy, because what happens if they don't make it? And the odds are more likely that somebody doesn't make it than they do make it. And I know, like with some of these top prospects, like okay, like they have a higher chance of getting to the big leagues. But what if they are Matt Laporta? No offense to the guy, I like the guy, but like he, this high prospect, and he comes up and doesn't. He's like a quad A player. He can't, too good for AAA, not good enough for major. It's kind of weird. What if they're Byron Buxton, some guy who has incredible talent and all the talent in the world, can't stay healthy and can't stay on the field? It's like there's a lot of risk into that, and but I feel like these days people are buying more on sort of on future of what they could do in the future than what they're actually doing right now.
Totally agree with that. And it's just one of those, I've talked about this before with an example of a guy like Luis Robert, where people are more enamored with the idea of Luis Robert rather than the player himself, and all the chatter on, you mentioned it earlier, social media. You constantly get exposed to all of these things and all this talk about these guys, and even just the image of like, hey, I picked up these cards today, and you see this same image over and over. It does something to you where it makes you really think like, wow, maybe this guy is something special. And you may not even be actively thinking about it, but yeah, I totally agree with that. And as time goes on, unfortunately, people get burned, and you learn that these guys aren't as good as maybe you thought they were. But also in time too, it can make your appreciation for these types of guys grow, especially those who have kind of come and gone over time. With going back to a guy like Jeter, who has that track record and he has proven himself, what do you think that we can learn from kind of Jeter's ups and downs and as far as his career and his hobby, and apply it towards the future, not just within his hobby, but also for these younger guys like a Judge or a Dominguez? Like, what can we as collectors do to, I don't know, maybe I'll leave it open ended for you on that. But
Well, for me personally, it helped actually just shape my collecting sort of journey, right? He was, oops, I'm sorry, I'm watching the game and they dropped the ball. And it helped shape my collecting journey. Here is a guy who becomes my favorite player, and even years after retirement, I'm still collecting his cards. And I think, for people who are truly collectors and want to collect and they're not in it for like investment and flipping purposes, because I have no advice for those people because I do not do that. I think it's important to find that focus so that you enjoy, no matter what happens in this hobby, no matter what happens sort of like in a player's career, you enjoy your collecting and what you're doing. Because like in this hobby, right, things have changed since I started collecting Derek Jeter cards. And literally his first card came out 30 years ago, which is crazy to think, because first cards came out in 1992. So it's crazy to think like 30 years these cards have been in existence. And in that 30 years, Fleer is gone, Donruss is gone, like all the, there's only one company making baseball cards now. Fanatics is joined, and cards are worth X money and this and that, and like investment, and all through all of that. For me, my one constant has been collecting Derek Jeter cards, and that's not going to change. So for me, it has allowed me to shape my hobby and my collecting journey to what I want it to be, and not let it get derailed by sort of any of these things like the new companies or just new trends. And it just lets me keep my focus on my hobby, so this way I'm able to still enjoy it no matter what happens in this hobby. um and for people, and it doesn't have to be a player, it could be anybody, right? It could be anything how you want to collect. So as long as you have a focus, regardless of what happens in this hobby, you're gonna be okay, because you can have fun no matter what. And I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how I feel about it.
I'm not even sure if I really asked a question. I kind of tripped over my own words there trying to get to the finish line. But I totally agree with that sentiment, is that once you find your lane, it is very easy to stay in that lane, and you get comfortable with it. And with Jeter and you, I think it's a perfect match. It was something that you got to grow up with. It's so tied into the culture of where you're from too. I mean, that's just there's not as many sport fans that get to kind of have that perfect storm, and maybe a lot of collectors too who don't really get to experience that, especially if you're not tied to a specific fandom of a specific team, or you have an organization that hasn't been as successful and created these superstar players over the past, however many years you've been a fan of them. So I totally agree with that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sports too. You could even go into non-sports too if there's something that is really a passion of yours, and being able to develop that connection. It's kind of like having, when you get your first car in high school, and it's probably some beater that you have all the problems with it along the way, but when you go to trade it in, you kind of have that sentimental feeling to it, or at least that was my experience with the car from my childhood that went into high school and college. That when you trade it in, it's kind of a bittersweet moment. Like, yeah, you're upgrading to the shiny new thing, but you had so many fun journey along the way with that car. So that's how I see it. One thing I did want to touch on too is that you do have a second kind of like player PC now in Anthony Rizzo. I think that's interesting because we haven't really talked about Rizzo and more so focused it on Judge and Dominguez, but he's a guy who's not a New York native. He, grew up in Florida, goes to the Cubs, and is part of probably one of the or what will go down as one of the most popular teams of all time now, and then comes to New York. And now this is his second season with the Yankees. What got you into Rizzo And what have you experienced differently from kind of collecting his cards as opposed to collecting someone like Jeter that you're more so intertwined with?
So years ago, I had a blog called A Cardboard Problem. And I had a blog post at the time because I always, even though I collected Jeter, I always I enjoyed having other PCs as well. So, I've dabbled in other PCs. I collected Kevin Kuzminoff cards and um, Jose Tabata cards. Speaking of prospects that don't make it and you spend too much money on, that was me with Jose Tabata and the Yankees. And then he goes to the Pirates, and I hope I burn those cards at this point. But so I wrote this blog post. It was like, I want a new PC, like to in addition to my Jeter one, because like Jeter cards are expensive. Like, so I want to actually just be able to enjoy something. So I put down a list of like 4 candidates of who these would be. And it was, at the time he was still alive, Jose Fernandez, Anthony Rizzo, Joe Panic, and I cannot remember. Oh no, Dylan Betances was the fourth one. He was obviously the Yankees at the time, and and I gave reasons for why for all of them. And for Rizzo, it was like I really liked the way he played. He had fun out there. He really enjoyed what he was doing, and his backstory of like, here's a guy who, he had cancer and he, fought it and beat it, and now he's back, and like literally, this guy's like literally every time you look at him, he's like looks like he's living his best life. Like, if you watch this guy play, he's just always looks like he's having fun, and he's an adult playing a kid's game, and I really enjoyed that aspect of him. I had gotten, and it was like I never chased any of these PCs. It was always like, do I want to spend my money on this guy or more Jeter cards? And more Jeter cards always went out. But if I pulled up a card of them while opening product, it was like I would put them to the side, and that's what I did with Rizzo. So then last year at the National, it was in Chicago, and that's when he got traded to the Yankees. And here are these little kids crying, at the National because their hero Anthony Rizzo just got traded to the Yankees, and I'm celebrating like a jerk. And I was like, great, guess what? Now I get to collect Anthony Rizzo cards in a Yankees uniform and like have no qualms about it. And that's kind of how it started. So I only collect his cards in a Yankees uniform. So it's not as though I'm going back and like trying to collect his Padres or his Cubs cards. It's strictly just Rizzo in a Yankees uniform. It's a little different for Jeter, because I could afford his autographs, whereas Jeter's autographs are a little more out of my price range.
Yeah, Jeter's one of those guys. He might be one of the few guys from, I would say, who played from 2000 onward, where you're not going to get an autograph of his for under $100. Like even a guy like Cabrera, if you set up for a Marlins sticker autograph, you could get it. I think maybe Ichiro, like a Marlins sticker auto, maybe if it was like a Panini card or a Leaf card, maybe you could get it for under $100. But like Pujols and Jeter, no, that's just one of those guys. But it definitely does, I think, help to have that secondary PC option. I explored it one time with a guy like Curtis Granderson, who there's probably 4 other Curtis Granderson collectors out there, but for similar reasons to what you say too, just really embracing them. I know that Rizzo's very philanthropic in the same sense to Jeter too. So in a sense, it's more so about who he is and what he necessarily accomplished on the field. So I'm going for almost an hour now. Any final thoughts before we kind of wrap up the show here? Again, I greatly appreciate you taking the time, Sooz, to come on and talk about the captain. I'm sure, it's a fun topic to talk about. I can go on and on about stories of Derek Jeter killing the Tigers, but we'll save that for a different day.
Derek Jeter blessed me one time. I'm going to tell that story. So in my past life, I was a sports writer before I started working in the industry. And because we're talking about Derek Jeter, I'm just going to tell you a Jeter story. And during the 2008 All-Star game, I might be trying to remember which one it was. 2000. I think it was 2008. I think it was at the Yankee Stadium that year. I think I might be misremembering, but anyway, whatever year, it was during one of those. It was like 2008 or 2009, one of those All-Stars. They have like media scrums where everybody's up on podiums, and like you could go and talk to, it's like they're sitting at this podium, and you go with like your little recorder, and you're like, hey, I want to ask you a question. And you're asking questions, people are asking questions. I'm sitting there and I have to sneeze, and I'm trying not to interrupt because there's like a bunch of other people around. And I'm like, and I do a little sneeze, and he kind of stops and he looks at me, and I'm like, oh God, don't look at me. I'm like, stop looking at me. He doesn't say anything. Everybody continues. And I sneeze again, and this little tiny sneeze, right in the corner. And he stops. He's like, "Oh, bless you." And I was like, "Oh my God, thank you." I was like, I didn't want to interrupt anybody's interview, but I'm like, "Thank you," and then like sulked away, so he didn't see me. That was it. That was my Jeter story.
For some reason, when you said that, I thought it was more so like I don't know, like some kind of like church blessing or something. I didn't think of like a sneeze blessing when you say that.
Honestly, I wouldn't tell people like, "Did you ever meet him?" Like, yes, he blessed me. There's lots of different thoughts people have with that comment. So then I tell the story, but I've met him other times besides that one time. But that's my favorite.
There you go. Well, I think that just embodies who he is. He's a guy who he's confident, but he doesn't take himself too seriously. He's in just what you said earlier about he's always the presser guy. He always has the right things to say, and just a good overall human being. So might have created some competition for yourself with all the Jeter cards out on the market now after we hyped him up here for an hour. But if people want to follow more so about your hobby journey and what you have going on as well, where can they find you? I know that you have your Twitter handle right there. That's where I engage with your content the most, but I know that you're in a lot of different areas. So tell the people how they can get in touch.
Yeah, so I'm at Yanks Chick, like it says there, Twitter, Instagram. And then I also have a newsletter called Card Chat where I've been doing a newsletter for about 2 years now, and it just discusses different topics in the hobby and sort of giving my views and opinions. And it's not just like it's using my insight of having worked at Beckett and Topps and in the industry knowledge to sort of decipher what is going on and make things a little bit more explainable to people in the hobby who may not understand certain aspects of it. So it's a pretty. I enjoy writing the newsletter. It comes out once a week, and you could either get a link in my bio on Twitter, or it's at cardchat.substack.com.
And you have a link tree as well, correct? Or okay, yeah. Normally I put
it's in the link tree. Yeah.
Perfect. So I usually put the link to the YouTube channel, but for anyone who listens to this on YouTube, you can go to the description. You'll see the link to the link tree, and then you can get to whatever link that you want to click on from there. And if you're listening on podcast form, first of all, thank you for listening. But you can see, actually, you can't see because it's not in video form, but Yanks Chick, YANX Chick on Twitter. You can find Sooz there. Once again, Sooz, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Jeter with me. As I said at the start of the show, I always really enjoy picking the brains of fellow player collectors and really seeing what got them connected to that player. So thought it was a great conversation. If you guys are interested in going back and listening to my other player-focused episodes, we have one on Juan Soto and one on Bryce Harper. If you have any suggestions for any players you'd like to see covered in a future episode and potentially a guest to cover them, we'd love to hear about that. Either it's in the comments section of YouTube, or if you reach out to me on any of my social medias, would greatly appreciate it. As always, we'd love to hear your feedback on the show as well. But until next time, take care, stay safe, and be kind.